For us to know where we're at, the rise of personal data is why we're in this call and why we have a law in place, because it's increasingly becoming a factor of production. Right now, for most organizations to provide a service to a client, you're taking a piece of personal data. Some of it is sensitive, like financial, medical, and other aspects. Others has to do with profiling, and there's an identity. So all this is becoming key in the factor of production in the digital age that we're in. Data can be transported at very low costs. It's very easy for someone to take a copy of personal data on a device as small as a smartphone and take a whole huge quantity in gigabytes of personal data. So it's very volatile. It's easy to be transported at a low cost. We're all consumers in this age. The abuse, its misuse, and abuse all have negative impacts on the organizations and also on us as consumers. And then every time there is a breach, that affects trust, and trust affects customers and consumers. So any deficit in trust unravels in the market in the digital age. And this personal data is growing as it's being collected on so many data points of us as individuals. For everyone here on call who has either a smartphone, let's say on your phone you have, if you have a smartphone, you obviously have your social media there, you have your email, let's say you have an app for your bank, or you have a mobile money wallet, and so many other things that you communicate, WhatsApp, and so many other things. So as just an individual, there are over 1,000 data points being collected about you every minute that you're using that phone. So when this comes into organizations, similarly, organizations are processing a lot of data points around their consumers, around their clients, to be able to give them a service. And that means that we really need to take up compliance to manage any risks that might come our way. And this is just a reminder on the right of the individuals. I know a lot of webinars have gone on this, so I'll not dwell on this a lot. Why I put it here is because it's going to form part and parcel of your compliance assessment. For every service you're offering a client, are you providing them the channels to exercise these rights? The right to be informed right before you onboard a client, how they access their personal data, how easily can someone do rectification of their data, how can you prevent processing of when it comes to direct marketing, and also the biggest issue, which is around ability for someone to easily file a complaint against non-compliance or against a breach. Remember, the regulations actually have timelines in there that you have to respond to. Some are 7 days, some are immediate. The DPO needs to delve deeply into these areas that they measure these aspects when you're doing your compliance assessments. As an organization, obviously, these have been done again, but I wanted to highlight them here because they're going to form part and parcel of the next slides. At a high level, I think everyone on the call here is already registered with the Data Protection Office. Registering is one step in the right direction. After registering, every organization should maintain a very good privacy governance, ensure that things are done lawfully according to the Data Protection Act and the regulations, what's allowed in there and what's not allowed. And also, the law actually requires every organization to maintain the appropriate technical and organizational measures to protect this personal data. So the rights of the individuals, the obligations of the organization, this format, the compliance that has to be done internally. I wanted to bring this one out on liability, where the law places this when it comes to data protection and privacy. So the law is clear that as a data controller, you are liable when a breach happens. Either it happens internally, it can happen on a contractor that you have procured to provide your service. And a breach, even if it's on the data processor side or the parts of the third party, you are liable. So when you do these compliance assessments, you're able to check and see what's our liability here. Are we exposed? Are we managing this? And this becomes part of a very good proactive journey. There's different responses that we've seen globally of agencies or organizations that there are different ways of approaching compliance. There are some culture, depending on the culture, the level of seriousness an organization has, or the type of effort that an organization attaches to complying with any law, any piece of legislation. So that culture, the tone at the top, normally drives how an organization moves. So for some, they do nothing, others act on it. So I'll just give a few examples of people that did nothing to check whether they're compliant or not compliant and what happened. In this particular case, this organization was collecting personal data, entering it into a system, and they neglected the hard copies where this personal data was, and this is medical information, and they were discarding it in an open manner and they're not securing that. So whereas data had been input by data entry clerks onto an IT system, the paper record was not protected, and that's where the breach happened. And you can see this was an issue of laxity on the physical side of protection. This other is typical that happens most of the time, disgruntled employees who have access rightfully to these different systems. And in this instance, someone was fired, the access control wasn't deactivated, and with that anger, they exposed the data that this organization was holding. And this issue wasn't a failure in an IT system, wasn't a failure in any aspect, it was just mismanagement of access rights for a former disgruntled employee. On this other aspect, this was one of the largest breaches in 2020. Over 10 million patients were affected. This company, Blackbaud, offers a service that is used by so many NGOs across the world and also healthcare institutions to manage their patients, their records, and all of that. And these guys were breached, which led to over 10 million records being affected. The estimates for this company was over $6 million in damages to do the remediation to make sure that they stop the breach, improve their systems, deal with the legal suits, and all those other things. Again, this was another one. A certain organization decided to get a developer who worked on a web booking platform which has personal data, and that system was poorly secured, and a hacker managed to get into there and get the data out. And also this led to a breach. This one here is quite interesting. An organization lost data because a laptop was stolen from one of their staff members. That laptop had a lot of personal data on it, and that laptop wasn't encrypted, it wasn't secured, and that's how the data got out. That's how the breach occurred generally for this organization. This one again is a ransomware attack that happened. For those that are not on the team, it's just a hacker getting in and taking a copy of all the data and holding the organization at ransom, asking for payment in exchange for returning the data. And this normally happens when there is a loophole, a vulnerability that can be exploited within the servers of that organization. This is again a ransomware attack. Again, another example of a poorly hacked secured IT system. This one is interesting because this breach happened through what we call an email phishing, targeting an employee. You know, those emails that come in promising things that are good to be true, and someone clicks on that, and that's how someone entered the organization and managed to exfiltrate a lot of data for over 280,000 people. This one is interesting. This is a physical break-in into a company office, and it was more of the normal part where people come at night, thugs breaking, and then pulled out data that they did use as well for different criminal purposes. So in this instance, you see that here it's just a physical breaking that occurred. So those are type of things that happen when nothing is done to try and protect those. And today's focus is going to look at how we act, and compliance is one of the ways that you can show you're acting to reduce your risk exposure. When you do register with the office, you are required best practice to create a privacy strategy. Obviously, this involves things to do with the policies that you have, the procedures, how you train your staff, how you monitor the regulatory environment around the country you're operating in, internal compliance, risk assessment, privacy by design, and different implications of doing business in any other country that might have inadequate privacy laws. So this is quite a number of boxes that need to be in place, obviously coordinated by the data protection officer. And this shows where these audits fit within this larger puzzle of your privacy strategy. So the audits are just one component, and today's presentation is going to go much deeper into the basics that need to drive that within the whole larger ecosystem of a privacy strategy for your organization. It's important to scan the environment so that you keep aware of the news around the industry, the regulator updates. These also inform part of your compliance when you see what's happening within the industry that you're operating in. Just this week, Ernst & Young, this is an extract from Uganda's Data Protection and Privacy Survey report, which was published by Ernst & Young. And this is just an extract that just shows 3 key areas that organizations need to be putting on their radar. Number 1 is the rapidly changing environment. Basically, from the survey, picking out a few key pointers, they noted out that internal audits and SMEs have a challenge in doing compliance and managing compliance, and also around costly financial risks. Regulations often come with penalties for failing to comply with the basic principles. And in the digital age, news of privacy travels lightning fast, which can cause a business disaster and sometimes impact market share. Number 3, the insight also noted that there is difficulty in the compliance. There's basically inability to map data flows, reactive approach to compliance, and also the biggest for which we are seeing that we see is compliance in policy, which is compliance on paper, compliance on documents, but a failure to carry out over these things into the business operations and information technology. So this is a public report that you can look at that tries to show from the survey carried out the implications of compliance. Going specifically to where we're at now, under the Data Protection and Privacy Regulation, specifically Regulation 50, every data controller, processor, or collector who's registered under the PDPO shall, within 90 days after the end of every financial year, submit to the PDPO their annual compliance reports. So those 90 days, going by the run calendar of the government financial year, the financial year ends in June of every year. So if we count the 19 days, that's July, August, and September. So you have 3 months as a DPO to make sure that organization files your annual compliance report with the Data Protection Office. So this is a mandatory requirement. And I'm going to highlight what should be covered within the annual compliance report. The first is the renewal status, which you need to indicate that your registration has been renewed. We know it runs annually, and you have to do this annually. The second is the leadership and oversight that your report has to show. the policies and procedures that you do have in place. For the best practices that whatever policy you has and procedure, there is a clause that has a requirement to review because technology changes quite often and you need to keep up with the trends. The DPO training as a data protection officer is expected that within a year you have done training because learning is a continuous process. Privacy is not a one-tick exercise, it's more of a continuous process to get an organization compliant. Now, the person at the top of coordinating this is a data protection officer who themselves have to be trained to do their job. The other part of training is the general staff in an organization, right from the driver up to the boards. There has to be an intentional program that has been designed, and all staff have participated within this privacy training. How many complaints you've handled within a year, how many were resolved, how many are pending, how many breaches have occurred, if any, and how they've been responded to. And also, if you've done a data protection impact assessment, there are triggers that determine how the DPA is done. There are webinars that have been done on this that you can find on the PDPO YouTube channel. And more importantly for today, you're required in this report to show that you have carried out a data protection and privacy audit or assessment. So it has to be covered within the report. So this is what should be covered high level within the annual compliance report. The PDPO has a link to this document that I think will be shared, but it's easily available under resources on the PDPO website. I have to zoom in on the data protection and privacy requirements. There is this table that you have to fill in as a DPO, and in here you're required to state the category of what was carried out. It could be an assessment that is done, or it could have been an audit, how many were done within that year, and also the percentage of implementation of recommendations. So this is between July 2022 and June 2023 for this period. Now, looking at the best practices on who should conduct this audit, it can be done by the internal data protection officer, especially if it's a small organization, a small enterprise, even a large enterprise, the DPO, depending on how well trained they are or exposed, they're able to carry out this internal assessment. For others, you could elect, contract an expert who can do this for you. The key is to ensure that the expert is actually an expert. They have the right teams and they have the right knowledge to carry the job so that you have value for money, but also you have assurance that what is being done is following best practices. So it's up to an organization to choose on how to go about it. The basics, this can be done by the DPO depending on their level of training, exposure, knowledge, capacity, and also ability to conduct that. And the other is choosing to outsource this to an expert, but just make sure that the expert is actually an expert. Now, there are two sides of the coin when we're doing these compliance assessments. One side looks at the organizational and administrative measures, and then the other looks at the technical measures for an organization. The compliance tool that has been availed, remember these are just the basics, but you can go beyond this depending on the type of organization that you're in. There are 7 areas under the organizational and administrative measures: leadership and oversight, your policies and procedures, the training and awareness for your organization, the individual rights, remember the ones that we started with at the beginning of the webinar, transparency, which is a key principle in how we process personal data, data sharing, and then also records management. So these are 7 areas that have to form the one side I talked about of organizational and administrative measures. So I'll just delve a high level on these areas. The first, there's leadership and oversight, and there are three key areas. The very first assessment that has to be done internally is the appointment or designation of a data protection officer. So the key item here is that this is formally done, and there is a job description which sets out the responsibilities and the reporting, and also that the staff are also appropriate in context of the organization. So does this exist? Is what the assessment will look out to check and see. And the second area is on the training of the data protection officer. We've seen various organizations appoint DPOs from different aspects within an organization. Some of it you find it's an IT officer, in others it's put a legal person, in others it's a compliance, that is risk. So it's quite a wide array that organizations are choosing to go about this. But the principle is that whoever is appointed as a DPO, first of all, they are independent and they're able to do their job. Number two, because this DPO requirement for most people have been at it for about 3 years, there's definitely a need for capacity building. So in here, the test is to see, has that DPO who has been appointed undergone any data protection and privacy training? Because before you lead, you must know what you're leading your team in. And a test, a measure of, remember, this is an assessment, so there has to be evidence for everything to back it up. So a measure of test would be if there's a training plan and if there's a budget and how that has actually transpired within there. There's also recognition that there are a lot of online tools and online free platforms, so this can also be done in self-directed, self-learning platforms that we are seeing around, such as Coursera, Udemy, and those likes. So the key is to show that the DPO has undergone training in data protection and privacy, and there has to be evidence to back it up. The third bucket of this is the roles of a data protection officer. And to test, I remember one of the key areas highlighted in the survey by EY was compliance on paper and failure to translate into operations. So an internal compliance assessment to check that the DPO, the first two are more paper-like. Appointed, yes, tick. There's a letter, responsibilities, and all that. Number two, I've received training. Yes, the DPO has done his trainings. Maybe I've attended all the webinars by the PDPO. Tick, tick. Then we come to operational roles. So we want to check and see, does the DPO have regular communication with the records manager? Here, it's more records manager, but depending on the organization, it could be evidence that the DPO has had regular communication, maybe with the IT team, operations team, marketing team, service desk team, with evidence of that. Evidence that the DPO has oversight of all data sharing agreements and arrangements. I know for some organizations, they have legal teams that lead this, but as a DPO, you need to have oversight, because a data sharing agreement means that a company has outsourced a certain piece of their processing to a third party. So whereas the focus is on the contract, there has to be a data sharing agreement that specifies the type of personal data that is being shared, the responsibilities of the data of that person you're contracting, and most importantly, the due diligence that you've done to make sure that they have done their job right, either registered to the Data Protection Office, and also importantly, a requirement for them to report to you immediately that they notice any breach. Because remember, liability here is placed squarely with you as a data controller. Does the DPO directly advise senior decision makers at the highest level? So there has to be evidence that you can show and say, yeah, you update your senior management or board maybe once a year or twice a year or quarterly. And there's also regular update about data protection and compliance. So these have to come out clearly with evidence to back it up. And this helps to show that you're moved from a policy level to operations. So this helps to show leadership and oversight. The other section looks at this is what the other section looks at, and here I want to see the policies and procedures that you have. Again, these are the type of high level of what a policy should have. It should have definitions, the scope. For everyone who has registered, you've submitted a policy. So on documents, it is there. So what we want, the check here, you have to have evidence that, number one, the policies are easily accessible by staff. There has to be a demonstration that staff have actually read and understood these the policies, the procedures, and also there has to be a check to see that people are complying with this policy. A test can be even with staff. The staff know where to report a breach. The staff know about the policies, and also there has to be evidence that these have been reviewed and approved by senior management. So this is a test. Don't worry about the texts. We'll share the whole assessment tool. It's even available on the website for you to go through. But when it comes to compliance, you need to know that the key thing here is, have the staff read and understood? Can they easily access it? Are they aware? Do they know where to report a breach? Has the policy been reviewed? If a policy says on paper, we're reviewing this in a year, have you reviewed it in a year? And you have to have evidence to back all this up. Remember all these things, when you do this compliance, you're also implementing your obligations. If a breach happens, these are some of the questions that an audit will go through on investigation. So when you have this in check, then you're reducing the severity of any breach that might happen or any decision. When it comes to staff training, these are other areas that the compliance assessment has to look at. And first of all, do you have a staff training program that is set out and documented? And number two, when an organization recruits new staff members as part of the induction onboarding process, is there evidence that new staff are being trained, but also is there refresher training periodically? Now, within an organization, obviously, there are people who handle much more data and the people who handle the basics. So the training has to be tailored to fit the audience. And also, how do you do awareness? Do you monitor that it's effective? So what we've seen in some places, an email, some organizations just send an email once, let's say, once in a year. This is Privacy Awareness Month. These are obligations and this and this. You send out an email, and then maybe you do one staff awareness presentation, and that's it. However, that is not enough to meet the expectations of the Data Protection Office. There has to be an extra move and evidence to back up that you're reporting on percentage of staff trained. Was it effective? Which means you have to test your staff. You have to show coverage of staff that attended the trainings. Remember, it's from the driver straight to the board chairman. Anyone in between has to attend, has to receive this training, and you have to make material easily available for people to continually access, and also collaborate with the HR that at any point in time that you're receiving staff, they are being trained on their roles. The other is more on this other area, other aspects that need to be taken into consideration when you're doing your internal assessment. The key factor here to look at is how transparent you're giving information to your clients. Remember the rights we talked about. How easily can someone know, I want to rectify this, I want to make a complaint, I want to make a data subject request? How easy can this be done within the organization? When it comes to things like erasure, there are processes in place to make sure that these are responded to. Remember, there are timelines which are set in the regulation. For organizations that do a lot of marketing, there has to be specific consent to receive marketing calls or direct marketing material. And remember, where consent is required, specifically in these cases, you have to be able to demonstrate that you've obtained that. And also procedures to handle complaints within the organization. Are they being tested? Are they publicly available? The other part also looks at this. And here to bring to your key attention is one of the indicators that an organization has a privacy strong approach is to look at the things that are public facing, and that would be the privacy notice that you find either on the website or on an app, even at the entrance if you have CCTV. The privacy notice content has requirements that you need to check for in there that you need to provide to your clients. There has to be a way that you review these notices and how often they're reviewed and how they take place and how easily accessible they are. The manner and tone of language should be very simple English that someone can easily understand without putting a lot of legal terms within your privacy notice content. So this is to check and see in all your public facing services or websites or channels, do they have a privacy notice? Does it meet these requirements? And do people know how easily to access it? Then for places that have CCTV on their premises, the type of CCTV rolled out is definitely increasing in terms of what it can do and how people can be profiled on that. So what's your privacy notice at the entrance that shows people this premise is under surveillance? For more details, please access our private CCTV policy in this other area. Those are key aspects for you to quick note of. Now, when it comes to data sharing and procedures, this is quite forgotten when it comes to privacy, because the law came, for some organizations, the law came into force when they already had contracts running for different third parties, where they're either giving you a service, and that service involves access to personal data. So the expectation is you update all those agreements and include a data sharing agreement, which protects you and helps you know that your third party is compliant with the law themselves. So when you're doing a non-compliance assessment, you need to check the register of all contracts that you have. All these contractors having a data protection agreement that specifies what they have access to, how they're securing it, their obligation to also register the Data Protection Office, and also you also set the requirements you expect for protection of the data, and you have to do due diligence on them. And then you also know that contracts end. So what's the provision in there for managing the life cycle of personal data after a contract has been terminated or after it has served its purpose. So these are all areas that DPO has to look at and have this in place to know that the organization is meeting its requirements. When it comes to records, for different organizations have different retention schedules. The government agencies have a retention schedule they follow, issued by Ministry of Public Service. Those regulated by Bank of Uganda, there is a retention schedule that's expected of that. In the medical field, there are over 20-something pieces that are there that determine the retention period for data. And then for others, it's as per the practice that you have. And remember, when you're registering with the Data Protection Office, there is a section where you specify your retention period. So it's, as a DPO, you need to check and see that different departments of the organization are aware of these retention periods, and are they actually adhering to these data retention periods as per the nature of your business or as part of parcel of maybe the industry that you're operating in, if there is a regulation that has a record in there. And again, disposal of data after that retention period is also something that a DPO should check, or that this internal assessment should be able to check. When moving on to the technical side of the issues that have to be looked at, aware that there are diverse organizations on this call. There are some that are very small enterprises, like startups that have 4 or 5 people. There are organizations that have maybe mid-size. They are between, the definition for mid-size, I think, is up to 25 employees. Beyond 25 employees, and you're stepping up out of the SME category. And also depending on how big you're using technology within your business operations. So the list I'll go into is just a high level. There are examples. It's not like the exhaustive list, but the DPO should be able to know what's applicable to the organization and then go ahead to check how compliant they are to these measures. The very first is on data backups, how are data backups being done. A data backup is very helpful for companies that have breaches. Things may crash, may get hit. In technology, you can rest assured that a breach will happen. That's a guarantee. There is no organization that will run 100% without an incident happening. That an incident will happen. The issue is how you react or how you detect early that a breach has happened. So backups are one of those things that save you at the end of the day to restore this data. Business continuity and disaster recovery, if you're heavily dependent on technology, you need to have a clear thought-out process on the business continuity and disaster recovery. So as a DPO, you check, first of all, is this being done? Number two, how often is it being done? Number three, how successfully is it being done? I know for some industries such as banking, they have to report on this to their board and test and report and say our business continuity was successful. Incident management is very important. The law regulation says if an incident occurs and that incident involved a breach of personal data, the requirement is to immediately notify the Data Protection Office, and there is a procedure for that in regulations. There's also a form for that on the website. So within your incident management process, it's important to embed in an aspect of privacy. Normally, the incidents are handled by IT teams, but should an IT team detect that personal data is involved, then they're required to notify the DPO, who will then handle the communications with the PDPO for the breach notification. So the test for compliance is to check if people are aware about this requirement and how they are observing it. Asset management is more around the assets that you have within the organization. These assets, let's say if it's computers, servers, and all that, they do have personal data on them. So it's important to have a proper foothold of your IT inventory, asset management, and how it is being done so that you protect your data. Supply chain is more third-party risk, like we've elaborated that. Access management, authorization. Access management is quite interesting because one of the examples we gave at the beginning of this webinar is a company that's had an issue with access management where a staff member was fired, but they managed to get back into the systems, and due to anger, were able to expose data of that company. So that means there was a problem with the access management. Normally here you have to check and see for all whoever is in the organization, do they have an approval to hold an account? Number two, how frequently is that access reviewed? When a staff member leaves, how quickly is that account deactivated? Is there an audit done? So that's what this will check when it comes to access management. Security is quite a diverse area because this, in most cases, you find there is a third party involved, there's a provider. It spans beyond just the organization. So there are checks that have to be done to make sure that the infrastructure, network security, the basics have been done right, the configurations are done right, and they're being monitored to make sure that they're effective. Audit logging also helps you to pick logs from all these platforms so that you're able to detect an anomaly or a suspicious event that you're able to react to quickly and stop something suspicious from happening. We live in what we call an API economy. There's a lot of data sharing happening based on IT platform and systems, sharing data between different organizations. And the security on there has been lax averagely, and something that has to be looked into when this compliance assessment is being done to check and see all the APIs that you have exposed, how is security being done within those APIs, and is it secure? A lot of fraud is happening just on the API side, because you may secure everything else from the first bullet up to audit logging, and someone comes in from the API aspect. Data encryption is important. And in data encryption, we say it has to apply to data in rest and also data in transit. And also apply it down to a device that staff members have. We've seen an incident. I showed one where a company had a breach because a staff member was thugged along the way and someone stole their laptop. So if that company had done hard disk encryption, they would have less worry because that would protect their data. But without doing encryption, even for data at rest, data on people's laptops, then an organization continuously faces a risk if a device is stolen. Remember, another aspect that we looked at was a physical break-in, where people break in and steal computers, hard disks, and all this. But if you have encryption, then you have less worry to deal with when such thefts happen. Malware prevention is the obvious, antivirus and all that has to happen. Are these effective? Are they licensed? Are they updated? Are they running? And are the reports being reviewed? Change management. Also, again, in this day and age, we live in a huge software-driven environment, which also has, depending on an organization, if they have an in-house team or if there is an external team to do for them software. So the aspects we're seeing here is over-reliance on vendors to do so many changes during the life cycle of a platform. The requirement, best practice that you have is change management procedure, where you look at these changes before you release or deploy new features, because a feature can easily break security and access and create a loophole. So there has to be a proper change management procedure that an organization looks at and says, we are going to make this feature change. As it passes security, as it passes checks, please go live and publish the change, and then monitor the effectiveness of that change. And so this has to happen if an organization that has a very heavy software-driven environment, especially with a mix of internal and external people or external people. Portable removable media is also important. Some people carry data on hard disks. Again, are we doing encryption on that? What's the policy on using USBs? This depends again on the type of personal data that you hold in within the organization. But as a DPO would be able to look at and say this applies to us, I have to check and see that this is effective and this is being done. Remote access is blew up after people had to work from home. COVID-19. Some organizations still today maintain flexi working hours. You can work from office, you can work outside office, which means there is still remote access being done actively. So how is that being managed? How is that being monitored? And how is that being locked down to make sure it's not being abused? And security monitoring helps to monitor all these logs, activities continuously, so that you're able to be on top of the game, detect early enough an incident or a suspicious issue, and be able to react to that. So security is quite important. To be able to check. This is more on the side of hiring people into sensitive positions. People that have capacity to create issues, especially if you have your IT platforms, your software systems. It's important to do a due diligence on a person before you recruit them to check that they're ethical, but not only that, that they have a good reference or background before you get them into your organization. Because you might have the right technology and you recruit a malicious person. And it's important that you do your check and check that this is happening. Again, personal security, there's also checking user behavior analytics that show they create a baseline of access that your organization has, people are using it. So if you have a company where most people work 8 to 5, maybe some people come in early at 6 and maybe leave at 8. So if you see someone working at 10 and they're accessing a sensitive file, 10 p.m., what's the issue? Why is that happening? So personal security looks more on the type of side to make sure that things are happening right from the people that you do have. And obviously, secure disposal, which has to be in your data sharing agreements, but also internally, when you're letting go of old laptops, old servers, how are you disposing that? If there are paper records, do you have shredders in your office where you can shred these things, or do you have a contract with someone that's able to dispose of securely paper records and make sure you don't have a breach? Remember, the first example I showed today was very poor disposal of the paper records that they had, yet they had a lot of sensitive medical data for their people. And then the last, obviously, is on physical and environmental security. Do you have the right checks in place? And remember, these are things, again, that you input when you register with the PDPO. So the DPO has to check that these things that you registered. And remember, the last part when you're submitting this is you confirm that whatever you're submitting is true, correct, and accurate. So in this DPO annual compliance reports, there's an expectation that even when it comes to these physical controls that are put in place, are they working? Are they effective? Are they meeting their purpose? And third-party assurance, please check on your third parties. Make sure that, first of all, the contract has a data sharing agreement. Due diligence has been done. They're aware of the responsibility to protect the data, and that you're continuously checking on what they're doing. And you also have a clear contract clause to describe how data will be handled when a third-party contract ends or is being terminated. So once the assessment looks at all those things, the expectation is that there is a report, and the report has findings, it has recommendations, it has timelines and responsibility. And the second expectation is that this report has been shared with top management. For some people, it goes to the board. The aspect is that someone at the top has to look at this report and accept it to demonstrate that they are committed to this. The assessment, no one expects 100% compliance. The issue is that you have done your job, and the findings show that there are things that have to be fixed, and someone's going to fix them. At the end of that, when your top management has done that, there's obviously an implementation roadmap that a DPO can use to just coordinate and make sure that people are doing their job to close these things and track continuously. So when you have this evidence, then you have done your job as a DPO to make sure that you've done the annual compliance assessment. Now, when you're done with all these things, that's when you come to this annual compliance report. So the expectation is all the things we've talked about, you've done them between July of last year and June of 2023. In the report, there is a section that requires this table where you can now come in and say category assessments. If it was done internally, you can say you did that internally. If it was done using an expert, you can say we had consulting firm X who carried out this thing. We did one audit last year. And remember when we talked about the recommendations and findings, you're able to report a percentage and say that we've closed maybe 10%, 5%, or 80% of the findings within this report. So that's how you get to this arrive at filling in this part of the annual compliance report. Remember, compliance doesn't stop. It follows this stuff knowledge where you plan, you do, you check, you act, you plan, you do, you check, you act. It's continuous because the aspect of personal data is volatile. As long as you have so many people accessing data, so many service providers, a lot of changes happening, this is a continuous process. This cycle doesn't stop. But some people look at compliance as, especially from top management of organizations, and the DPOs might know what to do, but you find the top management looks at it. Number one, if I don't do this, will I be fined? Number two, is there financial impact? Number three, okay, if it's mandatory, let's just hire someone to do this for us. So laxity. So this slide has to show the value of compliance and in business way, not even legal jargon. The first is here, huge fines for non-compliance with data protection laws and regulations. Uganda has some steep requirements, 2% of your annual turnover, if depending on the severity, but that's quite significant amount of money. There are other things in there that can happen based on non-compliance. Then based on based on industry reports that have been done, 46% of organizations that have ever suffered damage to their reputation and brand has been as a result of a privacy breach. So there's brand equity, there's reputation at stake. The third aspect, this is interesting. There's the organizations we've seen in other jurisdictions where an organization has been sued by their own staff members. As for other people, it has been their customers suing them. So the cost of a lawsuit is financial, it is productivity, it's brand, reputation, it cuts so many things. There's a cost attached to this. Again, for people, especially in high service industries, 65% of individuals whose personal data was ever breached lost trust in the organization that experienced the breach. And remember, a breach can be internal or it can be because of your contracted vendor. So it's important when you're doing your data sharing agreements to please check that your company is doing it right and recommend any findings where they are. Then for organizations that have so much competition and little price differentiation in the services that they offer, 30% of people will switch immediately when there's a breach. Another 25 loyal customers remain on to see how the organization is responding. Is your PR, is your board sending out proactive and saying, yes, we realize this has been hit. We've seen types of organizations in jurisdictions where they are hit and immediately they send a breach and say we've been hit, but we're working on ABCDFG, that type of aspect. But 30% switch providers immediately, they don't wait. Another 25 are the loyalists who will hang on a little bit with the organization. Then there's also the rising PR costs, crisis management, increased media coverage of breaches that has to be dealt with as well, which also does all add to the financial burden of all this. And remember, someone mentioned these words. In some places, advice is given, compliance is given, and still some organizations choose to do nothing. And in such cases, in business or in the organization, they say, for us, who has done it this way? So those are the 6 most expensive words that someone could look at in wanting to do things their own way and not following what regulations say and what regulatory notices do offer to the space that you're in. Even if it's not data protection and privacy, if you add any other regulation, this still compliance. We have always done it this way are the 6 most expensive words in business. I thank you so much for listening in, and we'll be open for a lot of any questions or inquiries that you might have.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel, for that very, very insightful presentation. I'll just move on straight to the questions. There are a couple of questions we have. I am going to begin with Jonathan Chinara, but I think I'm going to unmute him so that he's able to ask his question. Jonathan, are you able to speak?
Thank you. I don't know if you can hear me now.
Yes, we can hear you. You had about 2 questions. Kindly ask them.
Yes, I had about 2 questions, and others are just follow-ups. I think I've gotten one that about the renewal subscription or the annual membership. But now going to the 2 main questions. Several things have been raised in this question, and I think it has been it's kind of answered in a silent matter. It's an issue to do with the difference between the activity of a data protection officer and that is being done by what? The manual control officer, or what you're calling the general term, the risk and compliance officer. Very many times we have had external auditors raising issues that weighs the evidence that shows you've been appointed as a data protection officer. And of course, given the settings of very many other SMEs, I could say one that I'm representing. The structure organization sometimes cannot, the resource level can't allow to recruit several people into different positions when the roles are alike. So we tend to converge all these roles into a single platform that are represented by a single individual. You get into the company, the risk and control officer is the same time as the manual control officer, is the same time as the data protection officer. A scenario in case there's an external audit we did conduct, and apparently they're asking for that particular position. I had to present evidence of my job description, the appointment, that has these other different roles that cover the manual control officer and the data protection officer. Now, my question is to the PDPO. What is your position if someone presents that to you and there is evidence that these are the roles, and of course, going further beyond that, you see these roles are being executed? Now, the second question was, which actually was also the first, is that very many of the issues that have been raised and good enough to date came out as under the guise of compliance. Very many of the issues that have been raised are data protection. They are also covered under the relevant regulations of the Money Laundering Act, the Money Laundering Regulation, the Terrorism Act, and the Terrorism Regulation. And enough, even recently, Parliament also we have the Terrorism Regulation Amendment 2023, having something to do with the proliferation. This also falls under data protection. The data that is captured, protected, and how the privacy that you apportion it. All these are partly addressing all those relevant laws and regulations. Now, I'll give you a scenario. We have had several manuals. You have an operational manual, you have a financial manual, you have a human resource manual, you have also a business continuity manual, and all these have to address a key factor that is coming from the law and regulation. Apparently now, I have to have a separate individual manual that has to do with ML, terrorist financing, proliferation, and data protection. But the PDP has never really responded to my query on that. Since I have this and I address the issue of data protection also in that manual, doesn't it suffice as a one-off? Because you may find in Uganda's today, very many people take the initiative to sit down and read further. They first look at the first heading and they're off. Now, when you present several documents, I feel me having a separate data privacy document is a repetition of what I've already covered in my ML and what data protection policy. What is PDP's position? If I give you my ML and I've covered a section to do with data protection, I need to know that. Because already asking all the frontline people, please go through doing the necessary training, it's good. I put it on record. But we're looking at the individual's reskilling and appointees. I need to look at that. And that has to be done minus me presenting several documents, by presenting a one-off document, capturing key areas, then doing training, refresher training over and over again, so that I get on board. So what is PDP's position? When I present a one-off document that has the section, and I'm doing the relevant training, relevant reacquaintance, relevant follow-up and assessment. Thank you. I submit.
Thank you, Jonathan. Back to Emmanuel. What do you think?
Thank you so much for that question. And the office will give their formal response on that. Best practice is that for some occasions, obviously, that required by Financial Intelligence Authority to comply with the different aspects of AML and anti-terrorism crime financing, they're required to have, obviously, the law, the FEAR Act and all those required to an occasion to put in place someone responsible for compliance, and then have the team trained, and then have all these AML compliance programs running within the bank. So that the focus of that is to be able to detect suspicious activity and also notify government fear on those different requirements that they require to report the different aspects of financial transactions, the different limits that they have that you have to do reporting. And Data Protection and Privacy Act that most people normally mix is that it has a part to do with privacy and the focus is on personal data. And personal data is any data that you look at and you can identify and say, this is Emmanuel Mugabe. So any material that you have within that regards. And also, remember, that's where I started with the slide of, let me see if I can go back to it. Let me just zoom there straight. So there are these rights of individuals which are well stipulated in the Data Protection and Privacy Act, and you will not find these in the FIA or any other piece of legislation. These are inherent rights provided to the clients on who you're collecting personal data of, and also here are obligations of the organization. The main hallmark of the Data Protection and Privacy Law is to ensure that personal data is collected and processed lawfully. So there are some aspects that are common. Let me try and go to the slides. When I started the compliance checklist, there are some aspects that are compliant. For example, the technical measures, you'll find these are already within all the policies that you mentioned around the policies that you mentioned around backups, business continuity, IT audit, security, all that stuff is already embedded within an organization that already has that. When it comes to AML, you have things that you have to do for KYC and the types of records that you have to check, the type of financial transactions that you have to notify. You're supposed to hit your verification of KYC against persons, people of interest, export persons, people on other lists, so that you're able to know before you give someone a service. As part of your KYC, you've catered for that. Then there are destinations, different things that are in there that are within the FIA Act that you have to look at, which look at the financial side, the risk side, and the KYC side of that you could have in the other policy as well. When it comes to privacy, the law looks at you collecting and processing data lawfully, and that has to be captured in its own policy. For the others, you can have them in other documents that you might have. That you might already have in place, as people have an AML policy, you have a KYC thing that you have risks, because risk looks at other things even beyond AML. There's risk, corporate risk, financial risk, the IT risk, marketing risk, and other risks that you might look at. Those can be covered in other documents depending on how an organization is set up. Remember, I talked about some are small and medium, some are enterprise. But for privacy, it cuts out that part about the rights for individuals. It describes the circumstances upon which you are required as an organization, the obligations that you have. And those are best captured in a document of its own, because you'll not find those in any other piece of regulation. The aspect of when the law was being designed, it was being designed to be as mindful as possible, create as less financial burden on an organization to implement the act, and that's the same spirit done for the regulations. So if you see, the requirement is to designate. You don't have to recruit a new person to do DPO role. You assign an existing person and say, we now designate you as this, so you don't have to recruit. There are three ways you can either recruit, you create a job description, recruit a person, but that will obviously attract the spend on that of salary and all that stuff that you have to do. Or you can choose to designate an internal person and say, you're going to help us coordinate data protection and privacy and help us have oversight over these roles. Or you can outsource it and say, I'm going to outsource this to company X who offers DPO as a service. However, if you outsource, you still retain responsibility for the personal data that you have. So in this aspect, if I don't have specifics to your type of question, but if I looked at your job description and your description has a sentence in there that shows that you have oversight over this, then that's good enough to pass. The principle of the law is that someone has been assigned this role and that people in the organization know that so-and-so is our data protection officer and we can engage with them. So it could be a letter, it could be in the job description, but the aspect is to have evidence and allow evidence to speak for itself. And normally when an assessment happens, if you ask, that's why the auditor, I think, was trying to ask around and see, show me any type of evidence. So if you show them a job description and they read it and within there they say there's responsibility. So in most cases, like I mentioned, you'll find companies have either their legal person or their risk person or their compliance person or their auditor. Obviously, they're doing other roles within the organization, but it's clear that this responsibility has been allocated to so-and-so, and the whole company knows so-and-so is the one that does our DPO things, and also so-and-so has been empowered to do their job.
Okay, thank you very much. We still have a couple of questions coming in. However much we are running out of time, so I'll take about 2 or 3 more questions. There was a question on, someone was asking for standardization. Is there a standard data sharing agreement that we can use to domesticate? Over to you.
Thank you. There are quite a number online, but like I mentioned, the organizations are different. So it's like not one size everyone. They're different organizations. Like I mentioned, some are small enterprise. You find it will be a small organization and only 5 staff. Their services are running off Amazon and they do different things. Others you find it's quite large as a bank. So the data sharing agreements it's the DPO, whoever sends us DPO needs to do research and consult and get the right template from that. And also from our experience, we discourage giving out templates because every time you share a template, it becomes the holy grail. Everyone just edits and changes the name and don't even really give it the content and they sign off and it goes. So the template won't come because we've seen a template goes out and people take it as it has been issued by regulators. So this is what it would look like. And you find someone just changing only the organization name and they go to the bottom and they just change the name of the person signing. Everything in the middle remains the same, even if it is talking about a different organization. So the templates will not come. The advices, depending on the organization that you have, seek advice, seek clarity, and you're able to get the data sharing thing. The key principles are what's in the checklist, because the law, regulations, and the spirit of the PDPO is to follow as much as possible principles so that you use this in your organization. So the key principle in the data sharing agreement is that 1, you have specified the type of personal data that third party is processing. Number 2, you've specified the security measures you expect them to have. Number 3, you have asked them to report to you immediately aware of any breach that they might have. Number 4, you have a clause that defines how personal data is handled, either at the end of a contract or if a contract is terminated. And number 5, you've obviously mandated them to make sure that they are registered with the PDPO as a data processor and that they send you a certificate so that you're able to know that at least they are compliant. So those are the high-level principles. Anything else you can add into that, depending on on the organization that you are in.
Okay, thank you so much for that question. Someone was asking whether the office provides technical assistance to organizations regarding developing their policies. Kindly reach out to the office, send us an email on registration@pdpo.go.ug and let us know how you want to be supported. The next question for you, Emmanuel. Someone was asking, are there any specific penalties for failing to conduct training for each and every employee within the last financial year? How can one show substantial evidence of these trainings while compiling a compliance report? Over to you.
Yes, the office will give guidance on that, on the penalties. How you show evidence, you need, first of all, to have the material that you've used for your awareness. So if you've used the presentation, that's one piece of evidence that you need to have. Number two, you need to show if you are communicating to your staff, how did you do it? Was it on email? Maybe you have a copy of that email that you can show. People that attended that training or awareness that you carried out, you can also show that. And then number four, the frequency, the dates that they took place. So that's evidence that you can put together to show in that aspect. A key concern on that training is for DPO to know if a company has 120 employees and you carried out a session, maybe out of, let's say, 120, you only managed to get 20 people attending that awareness session. So that shows that the level of effort wasn't there. But the aspect is to report that and show that progress is progressing. I want to emphasize one thing. At the end of the day, all this that you're doing as compliance, remember when you do these checks that we talked about, you're having evidence to show that this is being done. An organization that does this continuously, year after year after year, is able to improve continuously. In the worst case that a breach happens and you're under investigation, these things help to reduce the severity of a decision. That's what should be important. The things that you do as a DPO, the compliance reports that you do, following these best practices, the evidences that you collect, in the worst case extent that a breach occurs, you have a better chance to have less severity rating for the breach that has happened. At the end of the day, it comes to the value of the company. It's more of like an insurance that at least you will not have those penalties coming. Those higher penalties, you won't have costly breaches. It's business terms. It translates into business terms at the end of the day. The last aspect, I want to just make a comment in a way that a regulator, the PDPO is a regulator, so it's not best practice, not wise to try and get a regulator to do some jobs that you want them to do. So if it's developing a policy, the regulator will not do that for you because they are independent and neutral. So you need to seek expertise for someone to help you draft that policy. Thank you, Anita. Back to you.
Okay, thank you so much for that clarification. I am going to take one more question here. Someone asked Emmanuel, can we use the compliance assessment criteria to conduct an internal data privacy risk impact assessment?
Thank you so much. So there are two things. The checklist that's on the website that will be shared today after this call is more on, it's broad as you've seen, looks at different areas of compliance. Now, when it comes to a data protection impact assessment or privacy impact assessment, that one is a different criteria. The office will also share that as well. The trigger for doing a DPIA is if, in a way that you are processing personal data in a way, in a manner or extent that is likely to increase the high risk exposure of your clients or citizens. So for example, if you had, let's say if you are doing a paper-based way of collecting personal data, and then you choose to automate that process and make it online, and then again, that system is going to be hosted on a cloud somewhere else, that's a pretty much significant change in how you're processing. So the shift to cloud has risks for the data that you're processing. So in that manner, then you do have conduct a DPIA. So there are specific triggers that require to do a DPIA. But the office will share that checklist as well. And there's a webinar that was done on this as well that's up on the YouTube channel. Thank you, Anita. Back to you.
Okay, thank you so much. I think I will close the questions here. Maybe before we close it off, Emmanuel, there is a very, very interesting question that came up. Someone was asking how the latest IT trends in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning fit in the data protection and privacy. Maybe to also say that today the National Personal Data Protection Director will be speaking at the ULS webinar on the same topic actually. So you can please check out our social media channels for the link and you register for it in time. It will be today at 3 p.m. Emmanuel, I do not know whether you have something to say on that.
Yes, the law has gives, remember the laws, Uganda's laws are principles-based. So there's a requirement in there around automated decision-making. And we see that a lot of artificial intelligence is used to help make, if you a company that is using AI to take a decision on someone, then the law has something in there for you that you need to look at, because that is automated decision making. So the principle is basically have transparency. There should be transparency in the best practice, the transparency of the AI algorithm that you're using to process the personal data or to take a decision based on processing of someone's personal data, and also be ready in case the data subject has a right to ask that you review that decision using a human being to look at the data. So the data subject can easily send a request and say, whereas you guys used AI maybe to assess my worthiness for a loan or something, I need this decision to be reviewed by a human being. That's one aspect. Number two, the second aspect actually the trends is that a lot of this AI, artificial intelligence, and also assistive generative technology that are coming to the hands of mainstream consumers, such as ChatGPT and Bard, are becoming a very interesting tool that people are using to analyze. Some people are using to analyze data. So if you have, let's say, a whole data set, some people are throwing it into ChatGPT and they say, hey, please analyze this for me. And also sometimes some people, developers, you can put a piece of code on ChatGPT and say, help me find an error around this. Now, at the back of the mind that I want people to know is that this machine learning learns based on input that it is provided with. So the more input that is provided into this technology, the more it learns. Now, there's some data can be used to give a response to someone else. There is a company now that is facing a suit because one of their staff members got the whole list of the company, threw it into this AI tool to analyze it and made a report. However, that data, personal data, remained with the provider. So if it's ChatGPT or Bard, the data remains there. You can't do away with it. And clients managed to find out that this happened to them. And since organizations are now facing a very costly suit because the staff member went and analyzed things using this technology. So those are the two aspects of AI that I can give at the moment. However, the law has provisions on that, especially automated decision making. If you're using automated decision making, using AI or machine learning to take a decision and using personal data to make that decision, then you are required. Just know that the law says you need to have a way that if I ask that you review that decision, not using AI, the law requires you to do that. So just provide for that, which means if you're using AI now, as a DPI, you need to ask your organization using DPI to analyze in the service, what's the algorithm looking like, what's the transparency in that algorithm, and then we see. And in the scenario of, let's say, someone offering a loan, and maybe you put in data, different aspects. Some people were offering loans and they would consider trust based on if you're male or female. So if your male, interest rate is higher, your female, interest rate is lower. So such insurance is being driven using AI to do that. Other aspects we are using, like you want to ask for a loan and you download this app, you create your profile, because it's unsecured and it's busy, it picks off your call records and all that. And the decision on whether to award you a loan is based on how often you call your mother, because most people call their mothers science has proven they are trustworthy people. So these things are happening in the back end. AI is driving all these things, but the decision was made on how often you call your mother, not in your financial capacity, and you get a loan. So those are small ways in which you need to look at your organization, see how are they using AI. The other thing is on how your staff are using AI. So it's important that today you actually figure out an acceptable use policy for AI. Now, given that someone noted today that there's I had a feeling that there's policy fatigue, a company has too many policies. So you can just look in your existing IT use policy and just add in a clause so that you're not creating a new one. And you say, this is our policy using AI. Number one, do not take any client data onto ChatGPT or take it onto Thingy. Number two, if you're creating an account on ChatGPT or BAD, do not create it using our company email address. Because guess what? ChatGPT had a breach. That breach exposed people's details that they used to create accounts, username, password. That forms what someone can use for social engineering. So your policy at least should cover only 2 sentences. Do not create an account on an AI platform using a company email address. Number two, do not input any personal data onto ChatGPT or AI. Have that communicated to staff members, and you're reducing some of the things that could happen to you. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you very much, Emma. We have come to the end of our webinar. We would like to thank you so much, our speaker for today, for these amazing insights you shared with us today. It has been a great pleasure having you and learning from you, of course, and we look forward to having you for any future engagements. The audience, I would like to thank you for keeping up with us until the end of this webinar. I saw there are a couple of questions about whether the presentation will be shared. Kindly note that we are going to share the presentation and recording on the emails that you used to register for this webinar. And I have also shared a link in the chat. Kindly click on that link and give us feedback. The feedback you give us will enable us to make these webinars better for you. Another important communication I would like to put across, if you're not registered yet, please visit our website today and create an account and go ahead and register. Also, the compliance assessment tools that were mentioned in this webinar are available on our website. And also the templates for the annual compliance report is also available on our website. Kindly log on to www.pdpo.go.ug to be able to access them. Thank you so much for attending today's webinar. I'll just give it about 2 minutes before I close so that we are all able to click on that link and give feedback. Thank you so much for attending. Have a wonderful day.